Now, in the second video on the orbital controlled reactions, we're going to finish up the cycloadditions and then look at electrocyclic reactions and sigmatropic reactions. So we're down here into sections 8, 9, and 10. And we're finishing up the cycloaddition reactions. This is a repeated slide just to remind you of the cycloaddition reaction, what it is. This is a Diels-Alder reaction. It's a 4+2 reaction where you have 2 new bonds formed and you lose a pi bond, and the pi bonds move around. And so here is pushing arrows. This is the depiction of the reaction. So now let's look at this. This is the MO description of the cycloaddition, the butadiene and the ethylene that you saw on the previous transparency, butadiene and the ethylene. This one shows the ethylene. This one shows a functional group, which is not shown in the MO description on this slide. So here you can see the 4 molecular orbitals of the butadiene and the 2 molecular orbitals of the ethylene. You can see the 4 pi electrons of butadiene and the 2 pi electrons of the ethylene. Notice that here the psi2 is the highest occupied molecular orbital. This one has 2 electrons. This is the lowest unoccupied molecular orbital, psi3, the LUMO. And here in ethylene, the 2 pi electrons are in psi1, which is the highest occupied molecular orbital, the HOMO. And then, of course, the LUMO is unoccupied. And so what the interaction that's going to take place such that you will have orbital control is the electrons in the highest occupied molecular orbital interact with the empty lowest unoccupied molecular orbital when these pi systems are brought close together. So the pi systems have to come close together, sort of face on, so that you can have an interaction between the pi systems. So it's called a HOMO-LUMO interaction. And this shows it. You can think of it this way. This isn't really quite what's happening, but you can think of it as the electrons here interacting with the empty p orbital there, but actually it's not quite that simple, but that's a good way to think of it. So this is the HOMO-LUMO interactions where the other antibonding orbitals are not shown. They're still here, they're just not shown because they're not involved in this reaction. So now we have the electrocyclic reactions, and this is a reaction in which the electrons, remember the electrons are all, the pi electrons are all in a cyclic fashion, and in the transition state, they just move around in a ring. The orbitals all sort of form a ring. The ends of the pi system must come close enough together so that they can overlap and form this new sigma bond. And then the remaining 4 electrons in this 6 electron system form 2 new pi bonds. It can also happen when you have a 4 pi electron system. So you will get 2 of the electrons involved in a new sigma bond, and the remaining 2 electrons form a a new pi bond. Here you can see that in this one we have the 3 pi electrons forming the new sigma bond and 2 new pi electrons. This was the same one that was the same reaction that was shown on the previous transparency. And you can see that you're going to have a new bond formed between the 2 terminal sp2 hybridized carbons. And notice that you can think of it as stereochemistry being preserved here. You can think of the methyl groups being on the same side as they are sort of on the outside of the incipient ring. So they're on the outside of this ring structure that is forming. They're on the same side. Over here you can see one is on the outside and one is on the inside. Here they are both on the outside, and now they wind up cis to each other in the product. If they are on opposite sides, so one is on the outside and one is pointing in, then they will be trans in the product. So in this particular pi system, because it's a 6 pi electron system. So you can think of it as stereochemistry is preserved when you think of it as these are on the same side, they're on the outside, or these are on opposite sides, one's on the inside and one is on the outside. So one winds up and one winds up down. So stereochemistry is preserved. This is the way that we've been looking at the p orbitals. This is the HOMO, in which you have 2 nodes. So this is the way that we've been looking at it. And now this is the way they need to be arranged in order to have overlap between the 2 terminal sp2 hybridized carbons. That is to say, the lobes of the sp2 hybridized carbons. So either you are going to have the bottom 2 lobes overlapping because they are of the same sign, you can see, or the top 2 lobes of the pi system will overlap. So it will be either the bottom or the top. And so you'll have to have rotation here in order to have these 2 lobes point at each other and form a new sigma bond. So they're going to have to like rotate down and point at each other and form a new sigma bond, or they're going to have to rotate up. So when this one rotates, it's going, let's say that you're going to have overlap between the 2 red lobes of these 2 p orbitals. So this one will rotate up. So this is going to be counterclockwise, and this one will rotate up. So this will be clockwise. And so these are rotating in opposite directions. One is counterclockwise, the other one is clockwise. And so these are going to be counterclockwise and clockwise. These are going to be disrotatory, okay, or disrotatory. So they will be rotating in opposite directions. So let's look at that on the next slide. You can see this one is the exact system that we were looking at, where the methyls are pointing out, not going in. They're on the same side because they're pointing out, and that would be this. And so when it reacts to give you a closed ring by heat, the 2 methyls are going to be on the same side again. So this molecule will be the product of the reaction here, of those 2 red lobes overlapping. Notice that when the the reaction is catalyzed by heat, you wind up with the cis product. If it's catalyzed by light, you get a reversal. It'll be trans. And so we'll discuss that in just a minute. Notice that, once again, we have the two methyls on opposite sides now. One is on the inside, the other one's on the outside. And so when these rotate, these are with heat, the heat catalyzed reaction, you're going to have a trans product. If the reaction is catalyzed by light, you have the cis, you have the reversal. So light reverses the stereochemistry of the reaction. That is the point of this slide. The light reverses the stereochemistry of this reaction. Heat gives this one a cis product, light gives this one a trans product. So the light will reverse the stereochemistry of the reaction. That's important to remember. And that always happens in these pericyclic reactions. So now we're looking at this reaction. Once again, notice that this is not the same psi. It's not the same molecular orbital that we were looking at up above. This, you do not have the two red lobes on the bottom. You have red and blue. So this is a different psi. This is actually psi 4. And what we were looking at back here is psi 3. Notice these are different. And that's because this is going, is showing the orbital of the molecular orbital psi 3 that would be used in the thermal reaction, whereas this is showing psi 4, in which an electron has been promoted to the LUMO by the light. And so this reaction down here is the one that's going to be shown by this orbital. I can just know because I recognize this as psi 4 and not psi 3. So you can go back and look at your notes, and you'll see here we start out with the methyl groups on the same side. Notice they're both going out. And when you have the rotation, so that you have the overlap between the two red lobes, this end will rotate counterclockwise, and this end will rotate counterclockwise. So that will be conrotatory because they're rotating in the same direction, and you'll get the trans product. And so that's this one down here. It's the photochemical pathway, and it shows the photochemical product that you get from having the two red lobes overlap. You could have just as easily had the two blue lobes overlap. It'll give the same product. It doesn't matter which one is chosen. Now, I've repeated this slide from the previous talk, because this is showing psi 3, and remember the two in the reaction that was controlled by heat, we had these two ends, these two lobes of the C1 and C6 p orbitals overlapping. But when it's catalyzed by light, one of the electrons is promoted to what was the LUMO. Now it becomes the HOMO because it's occupied. And so now the red is on the top, and over here the red is on the bottom. And so you're going to have a different type of rotation in order to have these two overlap and form a new sigma bond. And so this, I repeated this slide so that it would be closer. You would have an example closer to those slides in which the actual rotation and the reaction was being shown. Now here you can see this is Psi3. There we have the red lobes are on the bottom, both on the bottom. This is Psi4. When the electron is promoted, it's promoted into Psi4. Psi4 becomes the HOMO in the excited state, and now you have red on one is on the bottom on one end and red on the top on the other end. So that's what I was saying on the previous transparency. It can be a little bit confusing at first, but perhaps with all of these figures and presented in different ways and having them discussed in different ways, we're actually discussing the same thing in different ways repeatedly, and hopefully one of them will enable you to understand this. So here's the disrotatory. You can see the when the two bottom red lobes overlap, this carbon is going to have to rotate counterclockwise, and this carbon will rotate clockwise. And so they're rotating in different directions, and so it's disrotatory. They rotate so that these two lobes can overlap and form a sigma bond, and then when that happens, these methyls, which were both on the outside, are now both on the bottom. And so the stereochemistry is preserved in this reaction. This reaction is another way of drawing the one that we were just looking at, and it has 6 pi electrons involved in this reaction. Now, this one, this is showing the reaction that would be catalyzed by light, where Psi4 is being used. You can tell because one of the lobes, the terminal lobes, is on the bottom. Now one of the terminal lobes is on the top. And so in order to have the rotation take place so that these two overlap and form the new sigma bond, this red lobe is going to have to move up. That means that this carbon atom, the whole group, methyl group, or the whole terminal group, is going to have to rotate counterclockwise, and this terminal group is going to have to rotate clockwise. And so this one is clockwise, and this one is clockwise, so that the red lobe moves up. Here, the red lobe moves down. So they're moving in the same direction, both of them clockwise. And so this is conrotatory, so that the two red lobes will form the new sigma bond. Here, once again, the methyls are on the same side. They're on the outside of the molecule. And over here, the two methyls are not on the same side. One is on the bottom, one is on the top. So the trans product is given. Notice this is the same as I mentioned before. This is a reversal in stereochemistry because this reaction is taking place under the effects of light. So anytime that you have light added to the reaction conditions, it's going to reverse the stereochemistry of the product in these pericyclic reactions. So, under thermal conditions, the conjugated system with 6 pi electrons, and all of them that we've looked at so far have had 6 pi electrons, will be disrotatory. And remember that I mentioned that if light is added to the reaction conditions, then you have the stereochemistry of the products are reversed. There is another way to reverse the stereochemistry of the products, and that is by switching from 6 pi electrons to a system with 4 pi electrons. And that will reverse the stereochemistry. It will reverse the direction of the rotation from disrotatory to conrotatory. So there's two ways to reverse that, either by switching from thermal to photochemical conditions, or by switching from 6 pi electrons to 4 pi electrons. So there is that strange similarity there. It might help prevent confusion to keep that in your mind. So now we're talking about 4 pi electrons. So in the conditions where you have 4 pi electrons under heat, remember you're going to get, you will not have stereochemistry preserved. In the methyls that are on the outside don't wind up on the same side. They don't wind up cis here, they wind up trans. So they're trans here, and then if you have the light added to the reaction conditions, the trans is preserved as trans. So you have these strange reversals taking place. And so you can see that on this transparency also. There's two ways to reverse the stereochemistry of the reaction, either by adding light to the reaction conditions or by switching from 6 pi electrons to 4 pi electrons. This is showing what happens when you have 4 pi electrons, and this is under thermal conditions. So this is the HOMO. This is Psi2, the HOMO, and you can see that you have the red lobe on the bottom and a red lobe on the top. Here, when this is just sort of redrawn so that you can see it set up ready for the reaction to take place, you can see the red lobe on the bottom at one end and the red lobe on the top at the other end, and you're going to have to move this red lobe up so that the new bond can form, and this red lobe will be moved down so that the new bond will form. And when this is moved up or when this is moved down, both of those are migrating in the counterclockwise direction. And so the methyl will be moved down. This methyl will be moved up when that rotates. And so the product will be the trans product, just like you saw back here in this reaction. Back here in this reaction. That's what's depicted on the next slide. This is set up to react, for that reaction to take place. And this is depicting the same thing again. Here you can see this is a 4 pi system with the two methyls on the outside, on the same side. And now your product shows the product of the reaction. The new sigma bond has formed, the new pi bond has formed, and the two methyls are on opposite sides. However, if you add light to the reaction, you've got two reversals, which means that the methyls, which are on the same side here, wind up still on the same side, because the 4 pi electron system will reverse it once, and then switching to the light, the photocatalyzed reaction, that will reverse it again. And two reversals give you the retention of stereochemistry. This is going to make use of conrotatory cyclization, and this is disrotatory cyclization. I don't know that memorizing this table would help you any, but you might look over this table and just sort of use it as a checklist a couple of times, going through your reactions so that you can convince yourself that you do indeed see that when you have the cyclization using a 4 pi electron system under thermal conditions, you have a conrotatory reaction, and then it's reversed if you go photochemical. It will also be reversed if you switch to 6 pi electrons. You'll switch from conrotatory to disrotatory. If you go photochemical again, then it will be switched back from disrotatory to conrotatory. So maybe what this table best depicts is the way in which you have the reversal going from 4 to 6 pi electrons. You also have the reversal going from thermal to photochemical reaction. Now, in sigmatropic rearrangements, this is the third of the 3 types of pericyclic reactions that we are going to discuss. And here you can see that what a sigmatropic rearrangement is. We're talking here about a sigma bond that where one end of it migrates down 1 pi system and the other end of the sigma bond migrates down a different pi system. So this sigma bond is just simply moving down the 2 pi systems, and it moves down here. If the pi system had another pi bond, it would move all the way to the end of the longer pi bonds, the longer pi systems. And so we're just using small pi systems here to make it easier to explain. So this sigma bond is the one that is migrating, and it has actually migrated to the end of each of these 2 pi systems. And that was under thermodynamic conditions, using heat. And so you can see here, again, this is showing the same thing. It's migrated down. It just migrates down the pi system, the 2 pi systems. And so here is the new sigma bond. So what is happening, you can see this numbered 1, 2, 3. This pi system is considered to be 3 carbon units long, and the bottom pi system is considered to be 1, 2, 3 carbon units long. And so this sigmatropic rearrangement is called a 3-3 sigmatropic rearrangement, where the 3, this is the 3rd carbon from the original position. The original position is always numbered 1. So this one is carbon 1 by definition. And so the 3 tells how far down the pi system the sigma bond migrated. So this tells you that it migrated 3 carbons down 1 pi system and 3 carbons down the other pi system. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. And so that shows the terminology of the sigmatropic rearrangement. Now, it doesn't have to always be 3-3. You can have more or actually even fewer pi bonds. And so now this is an example in which you have fewer pi bonds. Here there's actually no pi bonds. And so this carbon-carbon bond stays bonded to this proton. And so it's a 1-5 sigmatropic rearrangement. That tells you that this carbon-carbon bond stayed attached to one of the atoms that it was originally bonded to. That's here. This is the 1. Now, the other pi system is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And so this carbon-carbon bond, the 5 tells you that it migrated 5 carbon atoms down that other pi system. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So here is the original sigma bond. This is the new sigma bond down here. And so this is the product. And you can see this methyl right here is a good marker that tells you that that CH bond actually did migrate over here because its relationship to the methyl group has changed. This reaction, which is the 3-3 sigmatropic reaction, actually has a name. It's called the Cope rearrangement, although I don't know that that is important for you to know the name Cope rearrangement. But one thing that's very interesting is in this reaction where the carbon-carbon bond migrates down the two pi systems, and it winds up over here. Now you have the same number of pi bonds, but one of the pi bonds is disubstituted. Over here, both of the pi bonds are only monosubstituted. Now you have one of the pi bonds which is disubstituted, and so this molecule is more stable than the reactant. So that's why this equilibrium is favors this product with the more highly substituted pi bond. The Claisen rearrangement is much like the Cope rearrangement, in which this CO bond is going to be the migrating bond. Now, instead of a carbon-carbon bond, it's a CO bond. And the pi systems are 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. So this is just like the Cope rearrangement, except that one of the atoms is an oxygen. And over here you can see the CO bond. So this is an aldehyde. You can see the CO, the carbonyl, which has formed. So here is the bond, the carbon-oxygen bond, which is migrating down the two pi systems to the terminus of the two pi systems. And so remember, this is, again, an equilibrium. And so the carbon-oxygen bond, the carbonyl, is more stabilized than a carbon-carbon pi bond. And so this product is favored. And so now you've seen, this is an allylic, vinylic ether. So this is showing these boxes, these green boxes, instead of showing what's reacting here, it's showing the names, the nomenclature, really. These green boxes are related to the nomenclature rather than demonstrating the pi systems, that the CO bond is migrating down. But it's still a 3-3 sigmatropic arrangement, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, with this bond migrating down those two pi systems. And so now you've seen some charge-controlled reactions, which are very much related to the pi systems that are in the molecules, because some of the carbocations are stabilized by the pi systems. And you've also seen orbital-controlled reactions. This is your first introduction to orbital-controlled reactions, and you've seen 3 of the orbital-controlled reactions, which another way to describe orbital-controlled reaction, the name for them is the pericyclic reactions. And so those were the cycloadditions, electrocyclic reactions, and sigmatropic rearrangements. And so that's what you've learned in this chapter.